Today's gospel reading is from the 13th chapter of the gospel according to Matthew. Jesus, in this section, has been ministering to the sick and confronting the authorities in the establishment, leading and teaching his disciples, enacting the good news. He has already carefully laid out his purpose in chapters 5 and 6 as he preached what is known as the Sermon on the Mount. In that sermon, Jesus described who is blessed, who is happy. He preached good news to the poor and release to the captive. Now he shifts to more poetic language as he begins to tell stories. This parable of Jesus is known by several names: parable of the sower, or the parable of the soils, or parable of the seeds. It's helpful to remember this because it points us to the truth that parables have more than one meaning. The fancy word for that is multivalence. It's a term that describes something as having multiple values of application and meaning and use. And parables, if they're anything, are multivalent. They are open to any number of interpretations, and almost all of them have value. Let's listen for that meaning and value as we listen for God's word to us in Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 through 9, and continuing on in verses 18 through 23. That day, Jesus went out of the house and sat down beside the lake. Such large crowds gathered around them that he climbed into a boat and sat down. The whole crowd was standing on the shore. He said many things to them in parables. A farmer went out to scatter seed. As he was scattering seed, some fell on the path, and birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on rocky ground where the soil was shallow. They sprouted immediately because the soil wasn't deep. But when the sun came up, it scorched the plants, and they dried up because they had no roots. Other seed fell among thorny plants. The thorny plants grew and choked them. Other seed fell on good soil and bore fruit. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another case, a yield of 60 to 1. And in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. Everyone who has ears should pay attention. And then continuing on in verses 18 through 23. Consider the parable of the farmer. Whenever people hear the word about the kingdom and don't understand it, the evil one comes and carries off what was planted in their hearts. This is the seed that was sown on the path. As for the seed that was spread on rocky ground, this refers to people who hear the word and immediately receive it. Because they have no roots, they last for only a little while. When they experience distress or abuse because of the word, they immediately fall away. As for the seed that was spread among thorny plants, this refers to those who hear the word, but the worries of this life and the false appeal of wealth choke out the word, and it bears no fruit. As for what was planted on good soil, this refers to those who hear and understand and bear fruit and produce. In one case, a yield of 100 to 1. In another case, a yield of 60 to 1. And in another case, a yield of 30 to 1. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Back in 1996, the little town of Roby, Texas, was in dire straits. 3 years of drought, boll weevils, an average income of $20,000. There were 616 people in Roby, Texas, and most of them were poor. Then overnight, there were 39 millionaires in Roby. A group of people, mostly farmers who hung around at the cotton gin, had pooled their money to buy lottery tickets. And they hit. They hit big. They won $46.6 million. Suddenly, after taxes, 39 people had an additional income of $40,000 a year. A friend of mine who lived nearby told me that he had asked one of those cotton farmers what he was going to do with all that money. "Well," said the farmer, "I reckon I'll keep farming until I go broke again." That's the kind of farmer we see in this story Jesus told. Any good gardener or farmer can tell you that the sower of seed in this story is not typical. Farmers, when they plant, don't go for broke every year. Farmers calculate the cost and reward of planting. They do not plant seeds on the road or in the thicket or in weedy or shallow or rocky soil. Good farmers plant carefully in the best soil available to them. Likewise, gardeners, you don't plant your tomato plants in the gravel or on the sidewalk. Good farmers and gardeners prepare the soil thoroughly before they plant. They till it up, they weed it, they fertilize. But this farmer is sowing seeds all over the place without regard to the quality of the soil or the potential for growth. And so it is with the gospel. The good news of God's love is for every heart. Perhaps that heart is downtrodden, beaten down like a path. Perhaps the good news is choked out by ambition and greed. Perhaps there is momentary enthusiasm for the gospel, but it fades away quickly. In none of those hearts can the gospel take root. But the generous sower sows the seeds anyway. That's one way to hear this parable. The sower is Jesus, broadcasting extravagantly the good news in every heart. He'll keep farming until he goes broke. That's the way I first heard and understood this story. The good news of God's love is for everyone, even for people who won't listen or don't stay with it or can't hear it. For many of us, hearing the parable in that way awakens us to grace. For some of us, hearing the parable in that way inspires us to share. With a God so extravagant in love, we can be generous too. Of course, there is another way, at least one other way, to hear this story, and that's to consider that in each individual human heart, there are all those types of soil: hard, thorny, shallow, good. I know there are places in my life, in my heart, that seem to be resistant to Christ's teaching. And there are places where enthusiasm springs up and dies fast. Places where my concern for self crowd out Jesus' demands on me. And there are places in my life where my heart is ready to receive, to nourish faith and let God's grace and love thrive and grow. And what struck me as I considered this parable for this time and place was the reality that if the soil in the story is the human heart, and all those types of soil are in every heart, Jesus, the farmer, is still sowing seeds in my heart and yours. The seeds are not only the salvation story of how God saves you and me, they are seeds of mercy and grace, the seeds of justice and peace. And I need to attend to the state of my own soul to receive those seeds. I can't prepare the hearts of everyone who hears of God's love. I can only attend to the condition of my own soul, my own soil, as it were. This is not to take anything away from the importance of community or the universal nature of God's grace. But like any good therapist will tell you, you can't change other people. You can only change yourself. That's worth thinking about in these troubled times. We've probably all said at least once or twice lately, why won't those people listen? Why won't they listen to reason, to mercy, to science, to logic? Why won't they listen to experience, to wisdom, to Jesus? Jesus, crazy farmer that he is, doesn't seem to worry about that. He just keeps sowing, not worrying about who is ready. And I have a job to do, to prepare my soul, my soil, for those seeds. In talking to farmers and gardeners, I've learned that preparing the soil is crucial to growing something good. What is hard must be broken up. What is stony must be cleared of stones. What is shallow must be made deeper and more receptive to the seed. What is choked with weeds must be cleaned, the weeds pulled out by the roots. And it all has to be fertilized. And apparently, the best fertilizer around is manure. Poop. There's a great story about a farmer going along the road pulling a trailer load of manure. A little boy playing in his yard sees the farmer and runs to the roadside to get a look at the big tractor. The farmer was a friendly guy, so he stopped to talk to the boy, and the little boy admired the big green tractor and asked about farming. And then the little kid asked, "What do you got in that trailer?" "Manure," the farmer replied. "Manure," the little kid explained. "What are you going to do with a trailer load of manure?" The farmer said, "Well, I'm going to put it on my strawberries." The boy gazed at the trailer for a moment, he gazed at the farmer, and then he said, "You ought to come and eat with us. We put ice cream on our strawberries." The truth is, friends, as much as we would prefer ice cream, the manure is needed for the crop to grow. The ice cream comes later. Are there places within your heart that are so hard that not even God's extravagant love can penetrate? How will you open up that space for God's love to dwell? Are there ways in which you are too shallow for goodness to take root? How will you seek the presence of God and let it germinate and grow? Are there spaces so choked out with your desire for things that there's no room for God's desires for you? How can you cultivate that area of your life to make room for justice and love? Each one of us can do this work. Not one of us can do this work for someone else. The sower sows the seeds, and they take root, and fruits appear. The fruits of love, joy, peace, and patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The fruits of the Spirit turn into sweet bounty for this world, for the realm of God, for they result in hearts changed and lives committed and love shared and justice for those on the margin. It's a harvest of good things. So, gracious God, you extravagant farmer, sow these seeds of goodness in us, so that when the Lord of the harvest returns, he will find us ready to offer up the best of all that we are. Those who have ears, let them hear. Amen.